Welcome back. And in this lesson, we're going to be hands-on installing our very own CentOS version 7 distribution of Linux using VirtualBox. Now, if you don't know what VirtualBox is a desktop virtualization software that Oracle actually owns that allows us to set up virtual machines to Linux, which is what we're going to be installing today. So let's go ahead and get started. There's a couple of things that we're going to need to do if you don't already have VirtualBox. For instance, what you're going to need to do is head out to virtualbox.org, and you'll notice over here on the left-hand side of the website, there's a downloads button. Go ahead and click that. Now, VirtualBox actually has several different platform packages available. Therefore, if you're using Windows, you can download and install this on Windows. If you're using OS X, in other words, if you're on a Mac, you can go ahead and download an installer for Mac. And if you're already using Linux as your host, you can actually download VirtualBox for Linux as well. So let's go ahead and download that. Run the installer. Just choose all of the defaults as you're installing VirtualBox. The next file that you're going to need to download, which is probably going to take you a little bit of time because it is a rather large file, is the actual CentOS 7 ISO file itself. So if you head over to CentOS.org, up at the very top, we have a Get CentOS button, or right here, you'll notice a big orange button that simply says Get CentOS 7 Now. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and you'll notice there are two ISOs that are available. The one that's going to be easiest for us to get is going to be the DVD ISO. This is going to have most of the information that we're going to need to actually install CentOS, versus the Everything ISO, which actually gives all the available packages, so it's a very large ISO file. But we don't really need that because we can download the latest and greatest updates even after it's installed. So let's go ahead and choose DVD ISO, and you'll be presented with several different links, which are basically mirrors of different locations around the world that you can download the ISO file. So go ahead and download that to a safe spot where you can grab it as we're installing this as a virtual machine for CentOS 7 in VirtualBox. Okay, so the first things first, I have my ISO downloaded, as you can see right here on my desktop. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click New. We're presented with what we can actually name our virtual machine. And I'm just going to simply call mine Linux Essentials. And I'm going to do _CentOS 7. Then we're presented with a type. Now, I do want to mention that obviously we're going to choose Linux for the type. However, when you're looking in the version drop-down box, you're going to notice there is not a CentOS option. There, however, is an option for Red Hat 64-bit. Now, by now, you should actually know that CentOS is actually the full open source equivalent of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux distribution. So really, it's the same software base, so we can choose Red Hat. The second thing that you need to be careful of is by making sure that you choose 64-bit. This is going to set up the architecture of our virtual machine to be appropriate. Therefore, if you were to choose the 32-bit and try to install a 64-bit operating system install, it's not going to work. So make sure that you choose Red Hat 64-bit here. Then we can simply click Continue. The next option is how much memory or RAM that we want to give our virtual machine. This is the same thing as setting up a physical machine, only virtual. So our virtual RAM that I would highly recommend is have at least 4 gigs. I'm going to go ahead and give mine 6, just so it runs a little bit more smoother, and because I have the overhead. Now again, if you don't have a lot of memory, you'll be fine with at least 4. And you can probably choose slower than that. In other words, you can probably get away with 2 or 3. But since we're probably going to be using a GUI-based window manager, if you can spare the extra memory, I would definitely recommend doing so. So I'm going to go ahead and click Continue. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a virtual hard drive. So go ahead and choose that and then select Create. And I'm going to go ahead and choose the VirtualBox disk image or VDI hard drive file type. I do want to mention real quickly here that if you happen to be using an environment where you have VMware's ESXi or even VMware's Parallels or VMware's desktop virtualization software, you can actually use the VMDK to more easily take your virtual machine in and out of VirtualBox virtualization into VMware's virtualization software as well. I'm going to go ahead and choose VDI here because I'm not concerned with being able to take this image into VMware products. I'm going to hit Continue. And I'm going to choose dynamically allocated file size for my hard drive. I'm going to explain furthermore what this means as we go through this install, but in a nutshell, this basically means that as our virtual machine size grows inside, so if I put images, if I put software, things that are actually going to get installed on the operating system side of our virtual machine, then the file size of this actual drive that's going to be on our host machine will dynamically allocate in size to what we choose here. So I'm going to hit continue, and this is going to be the size of our hard drive. So we can probably get away with 20. I wouldn't go any smaller than that if you're going to be installing software. In fact, this is another thing like the RAM. I recommend that if you have the free space on your hard drive, as you're following along in the Linux Essentials course, as well as practicing and you're installing more and more software, then the more space that you're going to need. So I'm going to go ahead and choose for mine. Let's go ahead and choose 30 gigabytes for our full hard drive size. Then we're going to select create. Okay, so before we actually power up this virtual machine, there's a couple of settings I want to take a look at. So here's my Linux Essentials virtual machine that I just selected, and I can either highlight it like so and then click settings, or I can right click and hit settings as well. Now on our settings menu, let's take a look at a few different options. First of all, we're presented on the general options, which simply gives us the name of our operating system. Again, it shows the type, which is Linux, and the version that we selected, which is Red Hat 64-bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at the advanced options. The advanced options has different things like being able to share our clipboard. So if I copied something on my host side, I can possibly paste it on my guest side. I'm not going to worry about any of that. I am going to, however, take a look at the next option, which is the description. If we wanted to put a description on here and say what this virtual machine does, sometimes this makes this easy if you have a lot of virtual machines and you couldn't remember what the specific task of that virtual machine that you were setting up is. You'll notice I have several different virtual machines, and sometimes this makes it easy for me if I have a note on that virtual machine on what it is that I do. Let's go ahead and take a look at the system option. Now the system option, first of all, has a boot order here that you'll notice, but one thing real clearly that you'll notice right up front is that it has a floppy selected. Now I don't know about you, but I haven't had a system with the floppy in several years, so I'm going to go ahead and deselect the floppy option just because it's unnecessary for this particular setup. First of all, I'm going to also take a look at the processor, and this gives us the option to select how many virtual CPUs that we want for our virtual machine. Now the default here is just one CPU, but if you do have the architecture, in other words, if you have an i7 or even an i5 Intel processor, you'll probably be fine by selecting at least two, and it'll also let your virtual machine run just a little bit more smoother. The next option is the acceleration. I'm going to go ahead and leave these two options enabled. And then we'll take a look at the next option, which is display. Now by default, your video memory is going to be selected at 12 megabytes. You'll also notice that by default, enabling 3D and 2D video acceleration is also disabled. Now, we are going to be using the GUI environment on this virtual machine. Now, if you have a pretty decent machine with a decent video card on it, go ahead and select Enable 3D Acceleration. Again, this will basically let your virtual machine run just a little bit more smoother. I'm also going to give my video memory at least 32 megs. Now, this is not a lot, but it will give it a little bit more breathing room than the 12 megabytes by default. Next, let's take a look at our storage again. And on the storage option, you'll notice down here that under the controller SATA drive, we simply have our 30 gigabyte drive that we selected. Now, if you remember just a few moments ago, I told you that what we wanted to do is actually select a dynamically allocated hard drive. So this is actually proof that our drive right now is only 2 megabytes in size. Well, why is that? That is because, well, first of all, we haven't even installed a virtual machine or any software for the operating system, as well as actually install anything on top of that operating system. However, as we install the operating system itself and software that will live on top of that operating system, this actual size will dynamically allocate. In other words, it will dynamically grow in size up to our 30 gigabyte and hard drive size. So you'll notice that actually later on, after you have an operating system installed, if you went into the storage option and took a look at the actual size, this will be larger than our original 2 megabytes in size as we're starting out. Now, the second thing that we can do is we can either go up here to our IDE controller and select empty on our CD drive, And we can select our actual ISO that over here we have on our desktop again of our CentOS 7 virtualization ISO. Now we can select that here by clicking the CD, but I'm going to show you a different way here in just a moment. Next, I'm going to take a look at audio. You can go ahead and leave that enabled. So the next thing that we need to take a look at is our actual network. And this is pretty important. There are several different options underneath our network or attached to option. We also have the opportunity to actually have more than one network interface here. And we're only going to be concerned with one, however. Now, notice under the attached to, we have NAT network, bridged adapter, internal network, host-only adapter, and generic driver. Now, so your virtual machine can easily get out to the network, what we're probably going to want to do is select the NAT network. So what this will actually do is give your virtual machine its own private IP address range, and then it will actually use your machine to get out to your gateway of whatever your gateway or router is on your network so that it can get out to the internet and pull down updates. So also notice under the adapter type here, we have what's called a para-virtualized network adapter. Now, I highly recommend that you choose this because it's VirtualBox's best way to be able to give your guest virtual machine the best performance when we actually install the guest operating system utilities. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And I'm going to go ahead and click. You'll notice right here where it says generates a new random MAC address, this little green arrow. If we do that, this is going to make sure that if you have already other virtual machines running on VirtualBox, that it actually gets a different MAC address. Sometimes VirtualBox is a little bit buggy, and we want to make sure for obvious reasons so that through DHCP, we get its own MAC address and its own IP address from that DHCP server. So I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh just a couple of times, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so now that we've selected different options for a hardware set, what we can do is we can either double click on the Linux Essentials virtual machine, or I can simply hit start if our Linux Essentials virtual machine is highlighted. But before we do that, we actually need to make sure that our ISO is attached. And there's a couple of ways to do that. So you'll notice down here under storage, if we click the storage option, you'll notice it'll highlight. We can get back to this option that I showed you earlier. Now, if you click right here, you'll notice it's empty for our CD drive, and we want to attach our CD. And in our case, our CD is just an ISO image. So over here on the right, I'm going to click this little icon that looks like a CD, and I'm going to choose a virtual CD DVD disk file. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go out to my desktop where my CentOS DVD ISO is, and then simply hit open. Once you're back to this menu, you can simply hit OK to close it, and either hit start or double click your virtual machine to pull up your first virtual machine boot. All right, so we're presented with a couple of options. The one that we're concerned with is we're going to arrow up to Install OS 7. Now, here's the deal. You'll notice the very first time that when you point your mouse into the virtual machine window, you can no longer move it around. This is because the virtual machine window has taken control of your keyboard and mouse. In fact, you'll notice up towards the top, it'll say you have the audio capture keyboard option turned on. This will cause the virtual machine to automatically capture, and if you looked at the rest of the window here, it would actually talk about your keyboard and mouse. Now, to get out of it, if you're on OS X, for instance, you'll hit Command, and you'll notice that it unattached my mouse. Again, if I click it, it has contained my mouse. I hit Command again, and my mouse is out. Let's go ahead and choose Install CentOS 7. And the first time it boots up, it'll take just a few moments, and it'll actually start up the installer for us. And this is our installer. So our first option here is simply to choose what language that we speak. I speak English, and I'm going to use an English United States language set and then hit continue. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do under localization towards the top is I'm going to choose my time zone. Now, I'm in the East Coast, so I'm going to let it actually stick at New York. That's fine. And then I'm going to choose either 24-hour or AM, PM type time. Now, you'll notice that right now, the time is not right. Now, you might notice that once we select this, your time is probably not going to be the appropriate time. This is because we need to start up our networking to pull in the time from the network time protocol. In fact, it even tells us and warns us here down towards the bottom. So if I go up here and I click done, let's do this first. Let's go down to network and host name, and let's turn on our network adapter. So if I click here on, it's actually going to pull in its own IP address. So I'm going to get 10.02.15, which happens to be a IP address range setup in my NAT networking. Now, real quickly, I do want to show you that this is actually manageable in VirtualBox. So if you go up here to VirtualBox and your menu, look for Preferences, and under Preferences, we can go over to the Network tab. Under the Network tab, we have a couple different options. Now, under NAT networks, this is what we're actually concerned with. If there is nothing listed here, you're not going to be able to get an IP address for your virtual machine. So if it is blank, if you come over here, you'll notice that you have an add networks. So what we need to do is hit add, and then we'll add a new line item down here. If it's the first one, it'll be the only one there. So if you double click it, this is where we can actually set in CIDR notation what we want our network to be. So for example, if you wanted it to be 192.168.0.1 or 10.0.2.0 in my instance here, and what network segment you want to get, I want to give it a /24. So it's going to be a 255.255.255.0 subnet mask. And I'm going to say I want it to support DHCP because I want my guest virtual machines to pull an IP address automatically from whatever network CIDR notation that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here because I already have mine already set up. So I'm going to subtract that. And this is the one that I'm using. Again, it's 10.0.2.0. Now, however, if you wanted to, you have what's called host-only networks. You'll notice I have several here, and those are for several different other projects that we do here at Linux Academy for other lessons that I've set up. And I want to just mention real quickly what host-only networks is. Host-only networks, you can actually set up whatever you want your subnet to be, but it's not accessible from other environments on your network. Also, it makes it a little bit harder to be able to get out to the internet, which is why we choose NAT networks, because we simply want to be able to download both updates and other software packages to our guest operating system. Okay, so then again, if you looked at settings on your virtual machine itself, this is where it all ties in. Again, under the network tab, I've attached to the NAT network so that it knows what NAT network to be able to pull its IP address from. Okay. So back here again on our guest operating system, you'll notice I have my network turned on. And before we get out of this window, you'll notice there is one more thing that we can do, and that is change our host name. Now we can either change it here or we can change our host name later on our guest machine. And I'll show you how to do that on other videos throughout this course so that you know how to do it manually. So I'm going to go ahead and leave mine blank at localhost.localdomain and then click done. All right, so the next thing that we need to do, let's go back up to date and time again. And this time, we can turn on what's called network time. So I'm going to turn mine on. So when I turn mine on, it's going to say add a mark usage for NTP servers. Well, it automatically pulls from these pools to pull down time. That's fine with me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then I'm going to select done. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is actually tell what installation source. You'll notice it says local media, which is already selected. That's your ISO. And for software selection, there's a couple different options. We have the minimal install, which is going to install CentOS 7 without a GUI environment. But for our first time using Linux, it's going to make things a little bit easier if we have a GUI environment. So down under here, we'll notice that we have the GNOME desktop. Let's go ahead and choose the GNOME desktop, or if you like, you can choose the KDE Plasma workspace as well. I actually recommend you use both so that you can play around with them. In fact, you might even want to set up a Linux Essentials server that's set up with the GNOME environment, and you have one also set up for the KDE. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to choose GNOME desktop and then click done. The next thing we need to do is choose our destination. In other words, what hard drive are we going to install CentOS 7 on? So go ahead and select installation destination. Make sure that our 30 gig hard drive is selected. And what we're going to do, since this is our first time installing Linux, is we're going to do automatically configure partitioning. So this is going to set up all the different drives, such as our boot drive, our actual root drive, where most of our files for our operating system is going to live, such as our home, as well as home drives and things like that. And we'll learn about all those different places that live on a Linux file system throughout this course. So for now, go ahead and select automatically, and then up at the top, click done. At this point, we can go ahead and click Begin Installation. And as it's installing, I'm going to go ahead and grab a cup of coffee, and we'll pick back up when this is done. Now, I also want to mention here, during the installation, you actually need to set up what your root password and your first user is going to be. So while it's installing, let's do that. I'm going to choose root password option first. And I'm going to go ahead and set a root password that I can remember, and then retype it to confirm, and then hit done. So our root password is now set. What we need to do is set up our first user. So go ahead and put what username you'd like it to be. In my case, I'm going to say Steven. I'm also going to say make this user administrator, which basically automatically adds the user Steven to the wheel group so that I have sudo privileges. So I'm going to go ahead and type in what I want the password to be for my user Steven, and then select done. And again, you can go ahead and wait a few minutes and we'll pick back up when this is done. Okay, so our installation of CentOS 7 first step is basically done. We know that because on the bottom it says it's successfully installed. And we're ready to actually use it. In other words, we're ready to reboot to get into our first instance of our Linux CentOS 7 virtual machine. So go ahead on the bottom right and hit reboot, and it will reboot our virtual machine just like this. So after the first step of installation, it wants us to actually accept the license information. So we just select that. Towards the bottom, hit I accept the license agreement, then hit done at the top, and then hit finish configuration. Now, we're not interested in the kdump at all for this particular lesson, so I'm going to go ahead and unselect that and then hit forward. All right, it's going to say it needs to be rebooted. Go ahead and select yes, and then OK. All right, so the first time that we boot into our Linux guest virtual machine, we should be presented with whatever the username is that you set up during installation. So you can select that name and then go ahead and enter the password that you set for that user. And then after it installs, it should be presented to you with your desktop environment. And here's our desktop. So again, I'm English, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. Select next, English for my input sources. And I'm not going to add any online accounts. In other words, things for cloud accounts and things like that. So go ahead and hit next, and then start using CentOS Linux. Okay, so there's a first couple of things that we need to do. First of all, let's make sure that we have access to the internet. So up towards the top, if you hit Applications, you should have a Firefox web browser already installed. So go ahead and select Firefox. And let's make sure that we can get out to the internet. So up towards our URL, it should take you to www.centos.org. Let's see if we can get to linuxacademy.com. Make sure that we can browse out to the internet. And there we have it. Looks like we now have access to the internet. So we're good there. So the first thing that we need to do, in fact, this is best practice, is to always upgrade your packages. So let's go ahead and do a yum upgrade. The other thing that we can do is use the GUI environment to do updates as well. Now we know we can use the yum package environment to both do updates and install applications, but we can also use under applications here and then system tools, we have a software update and software application. Now let's select software update. Now you'll notice it already found 213 updates that are available. So we can go ahead and select install updates, which is going to do the same thing as a yum install update. So I'm going to hit install updates. And you'll notice what it's doing is it's resolving dependencies that it needs for those packages and then downloading those packages. As soon as those packages are done downloading, you'll notice that the notification down here will change to installing. Now, this is going to first pop up and it's going to say, do you trust the source of the package? Well, we do. Let's go ahead and accept this key so that we have a signed URL. So go ahead and hit yes. It's going to ask us for our password. Again, this is our user password to give us root privileges to go ahead and install updates. So go ahead and hit that and then select authenticate. Okay, so once your update is complete, it'll say that all software is up to date. So we can simply select OK. And I'm going to go ahead and reboot now that we have all these updates done, just for safe measure. So there's a couple of things that you can do to reboot. The easiest one is if you select your username up in the top right-hand corner and select power off, then we can simply select restart. So I'm going to go ahead and do so. So now that we've rebooted, let's go ahead and again select our username and then our password that we chose, and then sign in. Okay, so a moment ago, we did the graphical user interface update option using the actual yum graphical install utility. Now again, if we wanted to do this from the terminal, we could select applications, head to our terminal here, and we can become root or use sudo. This time let's become root. I'm going to type su followed by a dash, and then enter our root password that we selected during the installation. So at this point, we can simply type yum update, and we'll go out to see if there's any updates that need updated. So it'll basically reply in this case, no package marked for update, which is because we just did it through the graphical interface. However, just know that you can use yum update on the package manager on your terminal as well. We can go ahead and exit out of here. But before we do that, there's a couple of things that I highly recommend that you install, and that is the guest edition packages. So what is the guest edition packages? Well, basically, there are utilities and tools that VirtualBox can install on our guest virtual machine, in this case, our CentOS 7 guest virtual machine, that does some virtualization hardware that makes our performance of our virtual machine run much better. It also allows things like bringing our mouse automatically in and out of our virtual machine. Now, again, right now, to get our mouse out, I have to hit Command on my keyboard, then I can move my mouse in and out of my virtual machine. But if we install the guest edition packages, we can make this work a little bit more magically. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, in order to install these packages, what we first need to install is what's known as the kernel headers. And to install the kernel headers, we are going to install a package called kernel-development or kernel-devil. So let's go ahead and type yum. Notice here I am root. You do need to be root to do this. So I'm going to type yum install space kernel, which is kernel -devel for development, followed by enter. All right, it's going to prompt us, are you sure you want to download this? And go ahead and hit yes. And let those kernel development packages install. Okay, so now that that's installed, I need to install a GCC compiler. Let's say we don't remember, and this is very useful when you're using the yum package tool. Let's say we forgot the name of that package name specifically. Well, we can use wildcards to go out and grab anything that it would find. So if I typed yum install, and I know that the package starts with GCC, I don't remember what the rest of the package is, I can simply do a star. So I do that, followed by enter. It's going to go out, found all the packages, and you'll notice here it found a bunch of different packages and updates. So let's go ahead and hit yes, and then enter. And we'll let those packages download and install. Okay, so now that we have the tools necessary, we can do the installation of our guest editions. We have the kernel headers that we need, and we have the compiler for the GCC compiler that's going to be needed to actually compile this package. Now, up towards the top, you'll notice underneath devices, in my drop-down menu here, we simply have this insert guest editions CD image. Well, let's go ahead and do that. And as soon as we do that, momentarily you'll notice that on our guest machine, we get this pop-up. It says that the VBox editions contain software intended to be automatically started. Do you want to go ahead and run it? Well, yes, let's go ahead and do that. If I hit run, it should kick off the script that needs to run to install the guest editions. So let's go ahead and hit our password in this box and then hit authenticate. All right, so you'll notice up here that it's building out the guest editions module. In other words, it's compiling using that GCC application that we downloaded a moment ago. When this is done, it'll pop up for us. All right, it's almost there. So basically it says it installed graphics libraries, it did some stuff on our Xorg server module, and a bunch of other guest edition stuff that we need. Furthermore, we'll notice that already if I move my mouse in and out of my windows, you can see right here, I no longer have to hit the Command key because it has the guest editions that it needs. So we can simply click in this window, hit enter, and we're done. And it's that easy to get our brand new Linux Essentials CentOS 7 VirtualBox up and running in VirtualBox. So we now have our own on our local host Linux CentOS 7 distribution up and running that we can use to practice and learn and break, and we can actually easily delete virtual machines and make as many as we want. So VirtualBox is very nice, especially when we're new to Linux, and virtualization is a great way to start out with Linux. Now again, I want to mention this is not necessarily something that you have to do for this course, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to be able to install your own in your own environment. But keep in mind that we can also use the Linux Academy lab servers to be able to follow along with most of these lessons as well. Let's go ahead and finish up this lesson and move into the next one now.